Hello everyone, this is Chapter 1, Human Body and Orientation, and we are going to do a PowerPoint presentation with voiceover and video. So we're going to start this anatomy class by just going over a general overview of anatomy and physiology. So what is the definition of anatomy? Right? Anatomy is going to be the study of the structures of the human body, while the physiology is going to be the study of the functions of the human body. So we can talk about general or gross anatomy, meaning large structures, large scale anatomy. We can also talk about microanatomy. And then the physiology is dependent on that anatomy. So the complementarity of structure and function tells us how those two things integrate together, how the anatomy and the physiology work together. For example, the structure of bone is such that we have a collagen matrix that is infused with a hard calcified inorganic salt, and that gives bone a very rigid structure. Bone being physiologically about support and protection is dependent on the strength of the calcium in the collagen matrix. So the anatomy of the calcium and the collagen dictate the physiology of strength and protection. So that's what we mean by complementarity of structure and function. Another example is, there's so many, in the lungs. We have this very delicate epithelial tissue, and the epithelial tissue is very, very thin. When we think about the function of our lungs, we want there to be a very thin membrane for gas exchange, so that when we inhale our oxygen, it can go from the external through that thin membrane into the lung tissue and into the blood. So the anatomy of a very thin layer of epithelial tissue dictates the physiology of ease of passage of substances across that membrane. So again, complementarity of structure and function, how those two things work together. So when we talk about anatomy, we go back to this organizational hierarchy of life where we start with atoms and molecules, move our way through organelles and cells in a biology class. From there, we sort of grow in complexity to what's called tissues, organs, and organ systems. And that's where we're going to sort of spend our time in A&P. We're going to spend our time talking about the tissue, the organ, and then the organ system of all the different body systems between A&P1 and A&P2. In this image, you'll see that there is also called the organismal level. We'll talk a little bit about sort of the overall organism, but if you want to talk about organisms, that's more of a sort of a bio-2 population biology type thing. We're going to spend our time at the tissue level. So a tissue is a group of cells that perform a common or related function. An organ would be different tissues that work together towards a common or related function. And then an organ system are those various organs that work together. Now, when we talk about the organ systems of the body, there are a number of them. This image takes sort of a pulled away view of the body in general and how the different organ systems within the body work together. So you'll see the digestive system taking in the nutrients, breaking them down. You'll see the respiratory system taking in the oxygen and eliminating carbon dioxide. The image isn't very great, but you'll see cardiovascular system in the middle, distributing the oxygen, distributing the nutrients that we get from the digestive system, that we get from the respiratory system, right? The urinary system on the bottom right, eliminating waste, excess ions, nitrogenous waste. So what you can see here in this image is even though we are going to speak of the body systems separately throughout the two courses, A&P1 and A&P2, you can see how they are interrelated. So don't forget that when we talk about the digestive system, we also should remember that there are hormones from the endocrine system that dictate this process, that we need to discuss the nutrients as they travel around the body in the circulatory system, right? Without the cardiovascular system, we don't have the method to take those nutrients to the cells and to the tissues. So we're going to talk about individual body systems, but don't forget that they are all interrelated. So what are these body systems? The first body system, and these are the systems in order that we will cover them pretty much from AMP1 to AMP2. We won't dive into the integumentary system until chapter 5 in this course, but we will start with it as our first major body system. So the integumentary system is the skin, hair, and nails. It's our external body covering. It has a varied number of roles in protection from abrasion, because the skin is multi-layered. Protecting from UV light, because we have melanin that will help to protect our cells. There's going to be pain and pressure receptors, sweat and oil glands for temperature regulation. So the integumentary system of skin, hair, and nails is quite a complex protective system of the body. Our skeletal system will be our bones, joints, cartilage, going to provide a framework to support the body from the inside. In many cases, as in the rib cage and the skull, we're going to see that it's going to be protective. The skeletal system also has blood cells, and so it plays a role in creating our blood, right, prior to when it moves into the cardiovascular system. Our bones also store minerals. We are familiar with eating and drinking dairy to promote strong bones and teeth. The calcium that is part of our bones is also really important for muscle contraction, which we'll find out when we get to the muscle chapters later on in the semester. But the calcium, while it is important for the strength of our bones, it's also important for other things metabolically. Our skeletal muscles, our muscular system. This is just the skeletal muscles that we're showing. We actually have 3 types of muscle tissue in the body. But our skeletal muscles are going to be for us to move, for stability, for posture, also manipulating our environment, our ability to move and turn and bend, gather things towards us, carry things like that. Another thing that's important about our muscular system is the maintenance of our body temperature, right? Maintaining heat. Every time our muscles contract, we use ATP. When we use ATP, a little bit of that ATP conversion is lost as heat. For warm-blooded animals, that's important, right? We need to maintain that internal body temperature. So production of heat by muscles is important. Our nervous system, so the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, right, have a integral role in the appropriate responses by the body. Our nervous system is constantly taking in information from our surroundings through our senses, making sense of that information, and doing something about it. That's external. We also have internal nervous system controls. Our brain is monitoring our oxygen levels, our carbon dioxide levels, the acid-base balance of the body, how much sugar we have, are we hungry, are we thirsty? That's sort of an internal signal. So our nervous system responds to both external and internal cues to maintain our body environment. The endocrine system, this is where we will start AMP2. So up through our nervous system is our AMP1 topics. From the endocrine system forward with this little summary is going to be what you cover in AMP2. So here we have our endocrine system, a set of glands that the body has that regulates our metabolism, our growth, our nutrient use, reproductive system. The chemicals called hormones that circulate throughout our body are vital to maintaining our overall metabolism, growth, and development. Cardiovascular system, right? That's our heart, our blood vessels, arteries, and veins, going to be responsible for pumping the blood throughout the body, delivering nutrients and oxygen and hormones to tissues, but also removing carbon dioxide, waste products, etc., and bringing them towards the liver and the kidneys for processing and elimination. Our lymphatic system and our immune system is a system of vessels and nodes that conduct excess fluid that doesn't get captured by the cardiovascular system, and it also conducts our white blood cells that are involved in our immunity. Right, the lymphatic system is pretty an interesting thing. It's sort of a system of ducts and vessels and nodes separate from the arteries and veins that conduct our lymph fluid. The respiratory system contains everything from the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, and trachea down to our lungs. It's responsible for supplying the tissues with oxygen and removing carbon dioxide from our tissues. Gas exchange occurs across those very delicate tissues of the lungs that we talked about a little bit earlier. Our digestive system, one long tube starting in the oral cavity down the esophagus to the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anus, one continuous tube. You'll notice here we also have the liver. The liver is not part of the tube, but it's going to secrete bile into the digestive system, along with the gallbladder and pancreas to make up our digestive system, breaking down our food into small absorbable units. The urinary system eliminates our waste products from the body. It regulates water, electrolyte, acid-base balance. It sort of filters out the blood. All of our blood goes into the kidney, gets filtered out. Things that we want to keep goes back through the renal vein and into the body. Things that the body needs to get rid of, we are going to get rid of down the ureters to the bladder, and then it'll be excreted from the body. Kidneys are always working. They're always thinking, what do I need now? What do I need more of, less of? Do I need more salt? Less salt, more acid, less acid, always tweaking what's being filtered in and filtered out. Fascinating system. Then we have the male and female reproductive systems. Obviously, the reproductive organs are different in both males and females. The overall function is to facilitate the next generation, either by fertilization and conception, or in the woman, the growth and development of the baby prior to birth and after birth. All right. Well, of course, I turn this slide, and the first thing I see is that there's a spelling error. When we talk about all of the body systems together, right, their overall goal, all the body systems working together, is maintenance of life, maintaining this body moving forward from birth until eventual wearing down and death. And that includes a variety of different, what would be called life goals. It's not a life goal like a career or having kids. It's a life goal for your body. In order to maintain life, these are the 8 things that the body needs to be able to do. Now, this says, I don't know what it says, maintaining boundaries, but it's maintaining boundaries. We have to have separate boundaries in the body for certain things to be able to occur. For example, we want to keep what's in the body separate from being outside the body. So the skin is a boundary. We want to have the stomach be able to digest, but we don't want all of those digestive fluids to be in the abdominal cavity. We need to maintain the boundary of that stomach separate from the internal cavity of the body. Things like that. So we need to be able to maintain boundaries, keeping certain things in and certain things out. And there are all different types of organs and membranes and boundaries in the body to do just that. Movement. We need to be able to move our bodies, right? To go get things, to bring things towards us, to go in another direction, move. We need to carry and bend and stretch. That's skeletal muscle movement. We need to move blood throughout the body. So the cardiovascular system, the heart, needs to be able to squeeze, muscle contraction, to move the fluid through the body. We need to be able to move move food through the digestive tract. We need to be able to move, and that's going to be our muscles, different types of muscles. Then we have responsiveness. Now, responsiveness means we need to be able to detect changes in our environment. So right now I'm sitting in the lab. It's kind of cold. My arms are exposed right now, but my hands are cold. So I've decided that I'm going to move my sleeve down, right? It's going to keep me a little warmer. That's because I have noticed, my brain has noticed that perhaps my body temperature is going down a little bit. We need to maintain that 98.6. So I am getting a little cold. It is brought to my attention, responsiveness, that to be responsive to that, I should probably warm up. That's responsiveness. This is nervous tissue, it's muscles, it's glands, things that detect changes in the environment, internal or external. The next one is digestion. So digestion is pretty self-explanatory. We need to be able to break down our food. We can't just take a turkey sandwich and rub it on our cells and have that absorb. That's not how it works. We need to take it in, we need to break it down, we need to have carbohydrates and fats and proteins and vitamins and minerals all digested into absorbable bits. All right, so metabolism, the chemical reactions that occur within our cells. We need to be able to process energy, ATP. We need to be able to do those little things within each individual cell that allow this body to function as a whole. Catabolic reactions of breaking things down. Anabolic reactions to create things. We need to create proteins, for example. That's metabolism. Excretion, we need to remove waste. We do that a variety of different ways. We have sweat on our skin, removes some electrolytes, things maybe we don't need. Liquid waste through our urinary system, and solid waste through our feces, right? Variety of different ways that we're going to get rid of and excrete waste. We exhale carbon dioxide, for example. Reproduction, we need to, if we want to ensure the continuity of life on the planet, we need to reproduce, make more humans. Male and female reproductive system, right, come into play. And then growth, we need to increase in size. We don't start out as a little baby and stay as a baby. We need to be able to be born and grow into an adult. Various different mechanisms insofar as our growth goes. So these are our maintenance of life goals. If our body can't complete these 8 things, we're going to have a problem. So when we talk about these 8 maintenance of life goals, right, they obviously require something. In order for us to digest, we need food. In order for us to have metabolism, we need nutrients, right? Things like that. So we have these basic survival needs. A body needs nutrients, that's carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, minerals, right, to fuel the cells. We need water, of course. We need oxygen. And then we need 2 things that we might not think too much about, but I just brought up because I was a little chilly. The appropriate body temperature. Our metabolism and the ability of our body to do what it needs to do only works when it's at a correct body temperature. Too hot, and we can break down our proteins, things like that. Too cold, and our body just begins to slow down, and we can't properly deliver oxygen, nutrients, etc. The last one, atmospheric pressure, that's one that people don't really ever really think about. Who even thinks about that? Because we're on the planet. So the planet Earth has a certain amount of pressure. Sort of that push, that gravitational, and that push from the atmosphere, kind of squeezing in on the Earth. Well, that pressure is how we were evolved. So we've evolved at a certain atmospheric pressure. We know that when we go too high or too low, we can feel our ears pop. If you go up super, super high in the mountains, it's really hard to breathe because the oxygen is not right. That's a change in atmospheric pressure. The amount of oxygen that passes across that delicate lung membrane is dependent on the pressure, right, that pushes it that way. If the pressure is less, then it's going to stay out here instead of going into the lungs, right? If the pressure is high, it's going to push it right through and it's going to end up in the lungs. If the pressure is not as high, it's going to be a delicate push, right? And then maybe some of these tissues aren't getting fueled the way they should. So atmospheric pressure is super important for the movement of substances across a membrane, in the kidney, in the digestive system, right? Everywhere, in the arteries and veins and the capillaries. Atmospheric pressure, super, super important. So when we think about these nutrients, water, oxygen, body temperature, it is not that we need to maintain a stringent number, but we need to maintain a range. Oxygen, such and such, nutrients, such and such. For example, glucose. Glucose, blood sugar, we should maintain roughly 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter of sugar in our bodies at all times. And so that means even when we had a big meal and we ate a lot of sugar, we need to bring that down. If we haven't eaten in a while and we're really hungry, we need to bring that up because our body only functions at 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. That's called homeostasis. Homeostasis is defined as the maintenance of an internal constant when the external constantly changes. So for example, we need to maintain a blood sugar of 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter when the external constantly changes, when we're putting in food and then when we're not eating food, right? So the overall homeostatic control system works for blood sugar, it works for acid-base balance, it works, which means it's pH, works for the oxygen, carbon dioxide level in the blood. We have homeostatic control mechanisms for most of our body conditions. Body temperature, right? I got too cold, pulled my sleeves down. Got a little warmer, pulled my sleeves back up, right? My body is telling me that I'm getting warm, I'm getting cold, I'm getting warm, I'm getting cold. How does it do that? Most of them work on the same general sort of 5-step arc. There's a stimulus, some sort of change. A receptor, usually in the brain or some sort of neurological receptor, detects that change, goes to the control center, usually the brain or the spinal cord or something like that, where there's a decision made. What are we going to do? The output is sent along some sort of efferent pathway to an effector organ, a gland, a muscle, something, and some sort of response. So for example, I got cold. The temperature change inside my body went up to my brain, right, and said, control center, what should we do about that? Seems like we're cold. We need to make sure we warm up. So the effector was my muscles pulling these sleeves down. That's my response. And hopefully this is going to be enough to boost my temperature up that little bit to bring it back in homeostasis. So homeostasis, again, maintenance of an internal constant. Now, this is going to be a feedback mechanism, right? There's going to be a stimulus and then a response. Stimulus and response. Sometimes we're going to call this a positive feedback. Sometimes we're going to call it a negative feedback. Where you're looking at the screen right now is called negative feedback. It negates the stimulus. Stimulus goes up, feedback makes it go down. Stimulus goes down, feedback makes it go up. So this is an example of body temperature, which we've been talking about. If we follow the top circle, you'll see that the body temperature goes up. You're exercising, it's a hot sunny day. The skin cells in the brain, and the brain cells say, you know what, we're getting warm. What should we do about that? Well, we are going to sweat autonomically. The body's just going to start to sweat. And when the body sweats, water is released under the surface. Every time water evaporates into the air, it pulls a piece of heat with it. So we're pulling heat away from the body as we sweat. And hopefully that brings the body temperature down. On the bottom half of this homeostatic balance, it shows if the body temperature falls, which is what just happened to me. Skin cells in the brain were like, ooh, you're getting cold. Let's bundle up, let's shiver, let's cover up, let's rise that body temperature. This is negative control because the response negates the original stimulus. Most of our homeostatic mechanisms are negative feedback. A few are positive feedback. One of them is childbirth. One contraction builds to more contractions that are stronger and more frequent. So they start from slow and not so strong, get stronger, 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 more frequent, more frequent, more frequent. Positive feedback means we are augmenting. We are going up, right? We're making it more and more and more. So childbirth is one. Eventually the baby is born after the most frequent, strongest contractions, right? And the baby is born. The positive feedback loop you're looking at now is blood clotting, right? We have a little cut and one platelet. Platelets are the little cell fragments that are going to block that leak. Platelets actually call to other platelets. So there's 5 of them. They're going to call 10 friends. They're going to call 10 friends until we've plugged up, right, that cut. And then the feedback cycle ends. So positive feedback means that we have something and then it augments that until we get to a certain end cycle. So we have homeostatic balance all the time, constantly. Now, imbalances in the homeostatic control system can cause disease, right? We can have diseases and illnesses that are caused from imbalances in our body homeostasis. All right, so the next part of the chapter this stops abruptly with homeostasis and then enters into orientation and directional terms. One of the first things we need to do when we're talking about anatomy is learn how to refer to certain body regions. Now, I would call this my face. Most people would. But we also can and should be able to break down the face into regions. Our nasal, our frontal, our mental, all the different regions of the body have orientation terms, how we refer to that. We also want to talk about how we refer to the body directionally. We don't just say it's up there, it's down there. We're going to use different words. We're going to use words like superior, right, meaning towards the head end. Inferior, meaning away from the head. Down, right, up, down would be superior, inferior. Ventral or anterior means towards the front of the body, and dorsal means towards the back of the body. Medial, towards the middle. Lateral, away from the middle, away from the midline. Intermediate is a weird one because it sort of means not medial or lateral. We don't use it very often, right, because it's a little bit strange, right, to say where something is intermediate, but it's a term. Then we have these ones, proximal and distal. These ones are kind of a challenge. We would only refer to proximal and distal when we're referring to an arm or a leg, right? An attachment of a limb. So proximal means closer to where it's attached. Distal means farther away from where it's attached. So the elbow is proximal to the wrist because it's closer to the shoulder. But the elbow is distal, right, to the shoulder because it's farther away. So proximal and distal. And then superficial means towards the outside. So my skin is superficial to my muscle. Deep means away. So my lungs are deep to the thoracic cage or something like that. These are terms that you will need to know. As are these. I'm not going to go over all of them. Each one of these, you'll see that there's an image of a man standing anterior view, posterior view, and all of the different terms that refer to the different body regions. And you'll see they're all highlighted by white. Some of them you'll probably already know. Like if I said oral, right, you would know that means the mouth. If I said, I don't know, let's find another one. Femoral, femur, you might think that means your thigh. There are others that you may not know. Popliteal means the back of the knee, right? I mean, that's a little bit. We might not know that one. So you're going to need to know these. So make sure that you take a look at this and commit these to memory. Easier said than done. Here's an anterior view alone, posterior view. Then we get into describing the body as if we would image the body. And we're going to do some imaging at the end of this section. But different planes. If we want to look at the body, we can look at it along what's called the frontal plane. The frontal plane means we have an anterior section and a posterior section. And the anterior and posterior section will allow us to see the front and back. And so the first picture here is this frontal section. Notice how you can see the shoulders, the lungs, the heart, the liver, right? And you can see it as though you're looking at it this way. That's a frontal plane, and you can have it as far anterior, as far posterior as you need. Then we have the median plane. Median means you're going to cut the body into a left and right side. You can have it right on the mid-sagittal. You can do it to the left or to the right. And the medial plane is the one on the far right. Notice how it's a picture of the body from the side. You can see the spinal cord. You can see some of the organs. And we can also section the body along what's called the transverse plane, creating a superior and an inferior section. This one happens to show this woman right across, almost right across the belly button, right? Transverse plane. And you can see that in the middle picture as though you have cut across and you're looking down on her torso. You can see the liver, the spinal cord, the pancreas, all looking down. So depending on what a doctor needs to see, you might get different images. Many of our imaging techniques now do 3D. CAT scan, MRI are going to look at a frontal plane a median plane and a transverse plane and make a combined picture, right, to see what you look like in 3D. So those are different planes of the body. This image talks about the body cavities. So we have the ventral body cavity in red, meaning anterior to the spine, the dorsal body cavity in yellow, meaning the cranial and spinal cord, so sort of our dorsal body cavity. The cranial cavity contains the brain. Spinal cavity contains our vertebral column, our spinal cord. Our anterior or ventral body cavity can be broken up into 2 or 3 different regions. We'll do thoracic on the left. And if you look at that on the right, you'll notice there are 4 sections in there. 1 for the heart, that's your pericardial cavity. 2 for the lungs, your pleural cavity, and then the mediastinum. Then you have the abdominal pelvic cavity, in which you'll see 2 different cavities. The abdominal cavity for your digestive organs, and then the pelvic cavity right at the bottom for your urinary bladder and reproductive organs and rectum. Each of these cavities are surrounded by a membrane. This goes back to maintaining boundaries. The heart is in its own little case. Each lung has its own little case. The abdominal organs have their own little. The heart is surrounded by something called pericardium. The lungs are surrounded by pleura. The abdominal pelvic cavity is surrounded by peritoneum. Each different types of membrane. And what does that mean? I skipped over a couple of slides because they're just a closer view of what we discussed. Here is the pericardial membrane. You'll notice at the top it's a hand stuffed into a balloon. So this is what we're going to think about when we think about our abdominal cavities. It's 2 layers of membrane. So if we stick our hand in the balloon, the one that is rigid, right adhered to the hand, would be our visceral serosa. Visceral means right on the viscera, right on the organ. Then there'd be space with the air. Then there'd be the outer part of the balloon, which would be the parietal layer. So when we look at the heart, you'll see there's a heart, a little layer of blue, pericardial space, and what's called the parietal pericardium. So the heart has the heart, the visceral pericardium around it, the pericardial space, and the parietal pericardium. The pericardial space has serous fluid in it. Each of these cavities have that double membrane system with fluid in between. And so that fluid allows for them to be moved, right? We move, we bend, we stretch, we breathe, our heart beats. They can all exist and move supported structurally in a reduced friction environment inside their cavities. So pericardium surrounding the heart, pleura surrounding the lungs, peritoneum surrounding the abdominal cavity organs or the abdominal organs. It's called serosa. Right? And we'll get into membranes a little bit more when we do tissues. But that's going to provide that protective, frictionless environment for the various organs. The last thing that we want to discuss is the abdominal cavity scanning. So when we look at this picture, it's a CT scan. And the CT scan is going to give us a picture of the different structures in the abdomen. This is a picture, it's called a DSA image. And what you'll notice is that you can see heart tissue and you can see arteries supplying the heart. You can see a narrowing of the artery right in the middle there where that artery has been pinched. And then this is a PET scan. It's looking at the metabolism of the different cells in the brain at any one time. So imaging, right? We have different types of imaging techniques. This goes back to those planes of the body. We might want to look at something along a transverse plane. We might look at something along a sagittal plane. We might look at something along a frontal plane. Some of them are going to look at all 3 of those as a 3D image. So the best imaging techniques, right? We have all different types. We have X-rays and CT scans and MRIs. Depends on what the doctor's looking at. Is he looking at dense structures, bone, things like that, or need to look through bone? Then we're going to need X-ray or CT or something called a DSR, which is a variation of a CT scan. If we want to see the way the cells are when they're active, when they're metabolizing, we're going to look for a PET, positive electron tomography, I think is the name. that people use that for cancer to see if we have active cancer cells in the body, things like that. The image we just saw was for Alzheimer's. And then soft tissue structures such as internal organs, or if you want to see a baby growing or something like that, ultrasound, MRI, and something called MRS. So this is when we're going to, this is one example of sort of talking about the anatomy, and then how, from an allied health perspective, where would you see this? Where would you need this, right? Why do we need to know about the cavities and the planes? Well, because eventually you're going to end up in a situation in which you're looking at some sort of image, or you're helping a doctor look at some sort of image, and you might need to refer to different cavities and things for imaging techniques. All right, so that's the end of chapter 1, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't talk too quickly, and I look forward to seeing you in lab.